Alright, what's going on, guys? It's hard to believe that we are finally down to the last few days until the release of Elden Ring DLC. And I know it really doesn't feel real, but the one thing that is very real is that this final week and a half is going to be the slowest of it all. Now, as we are staying spoiler-free here on this channel, what better way is there to pass the time and get into the Elden Ring spirit than by diving into even more secrets and discoveries in the base game that I can almost guarantee you didn't know about. So, as always with these videos, if I show you something today that you didn't know, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, but of course with that, let's go ahead and get into it. The first of our discoveries today takes us to the mountaintops of the Giants, and one of the first locations you'll encounter there, the Zamor Ruins, home of the Zamor Knights, one of the strongest enemies in the entire game. And since these ancient warriors are so powerful, this little dilapidated village is the only place in the game where you fight these enemies outside of a designated boss fight, and with several of them patrolling the area, it makes it very hard to acquire the two treasures that you need in this village. But did you know, From Software actually gave us a very creative way to navigate this village without alerting any of the Zamor Knights. If you walk along the left side of the village, out of the view of the Zamor Knight in the middle, you will eventually come across a spirit squirrel. This little squirrel will be your guide through the Zamor village. While most animals in Elden Ring are programmed to run away from your character, this little squirrel will wait on you to go up to it. Now, when you approach the squirrel, he'll begin to take off down a path, and if you choose to follow him, this will be the perfect route to walk through the village undetected. Now, following the squirrel all the way will lead you straight to the treasure chest, and he even walks down the stairs into the chamber. Now, this one was crazy to me because I never imagined that these wild animals would have some scripted events like this. I've been playing the game non-stop for 2 years, and it never even occurred to me to check where they go. Now, I tested this a few times on different characters, and this is a scripted event. It's a very creative way that From Software provided the player an easy navigation through one of the hardest little villages in the entire game. And after researching this a bit more, I did find that there's one other instance of this in the game, so I'm curious to hear if some of you guys in the comments know what that is. This next one is pretty mind-blowing and shows just how deep many of the naming conventions in From Software games can go. Now, we've done deep dives into some of the etymology of the names in Elden Ring here on the channel before, such as the Great Serpent Egle, tracing its name to an old Lithuanian folktale. But today we're going to look at the namesake of two characters which draw their name from the same source, those being Gowry and Millicent. These characters can trace their inspiration from an old poem known as the Insect God by Edward Gorey. Now, when it comes to Gowry's name, Gowry and Gorey use the same Japanese characters to spell their names, so it's likely that Gowry is named after the author, but the actual contents of the poem tell a morbid story about a little girl named Millicent Frasley who is playing by herself in a park when a dark car pulls up and kidnaps her. The poem ends by describing the girl stuffed into a strange pod and sacrificed to an insect god. It's very weird and very dark and sounds exactly like the kind of thing From Software would be inspired by, but when you start to consider the story here, with Gowry being able to possess the insect pests, those pests worshipping Millicent, and the scorpion stinger item description describing the god of rot as some great insect, then it's very clear that this poem by Edward Gorey had a hand in forging this story. Now, like we stated earlier, Shadow of the Erdtree is just a few days away, and everyone's worried about how they're going to prepare and get the best experience out of the DLC. But one thing that a lot of people are not considering is how to prepare outside the game by optimizing the hardware you're going to be playing on, which is why we're partnering with Apex Gaming PCs to bring you just that. Top-of-the-line pre-built gaming PCs, specially made just in time for Elden Ring DLC. There are 3 tiers of PCs available, with the top 2 including a 40 series GPU, which will more than be able to capture all those beautiful vistas. So use my link down in the description and pinned comment to get your new gaming PC today. But now let's get back into it. If you're someone that goes throughout the game, fighting every enemy and exploring every nook and cranny, the Shifra Aqueduct can prove to be one of the most difficult rooms in the game. And that's because this very small area is home to not one, but 2 Crucible Knights. But did you know that you can actually cheese both of these Crucible Knights without engaging them in a fight at all. And that's due to a very unique interaction that happens when you use a bewitching branch on these hollows throughout the area. If you bewitch these hollows and take them outside the Crucible Knight, they'll begin to fight each other. Now that's normal, that's the intended effect of the bewitching branch. But what isn't normal is that these enemies become effectively invincible and take basically zero damage from this Crucible Knights. I have no idea why this happens. If you've used a bewitching branch before, you know that it doesn't affect the health of the enemy at all. It simply makes their aggro volatile for a short period of time. But for some reason, these specific enemies do not take damage from these Crucible Knights. And this effect actually lasts long enough to where you can go aggro the first Crucible Knight and bring him back to this room, where these hollows will do the exact same thing they did to the other Crucible Knight and absolutely steamroll him. Now, like I said, the bewitching branch is never supposed to do this, so I can't tell you why it happens here. Maybe someone who has access to the files can check the parameters on these guys and solve this mystery, but for now, enjoy your free kill over these Crucible Knights. For the next discovery, we're going back to the mountaintops of the Giants. This area is mostly not a fan favorite, even though I personally enjoy the atmosphere of it. But one thing that likely would have made a lot more people enjoy this area is something that was cut from the game. Did you know that once upon a time in development, the mountaintops of the Giants would have had their own Aurora Borealis? If you would be exploring this area between the hours of 9 p.m. and 3 a.m., you would have had the chance to see this aurora. It would appear very high in the sky and look like what you're seeing on screen now, with even one of the light streams wrapping around the moon. Now, I'm a bit sad that this one was cut. I think it would have added a lot of personality to the mountaintops that it could really benefit from, and it would have added that little bit of personality that it feels the mountaintops is lacking. But if you want to learn more about this aurora and see how it would have worked mechanically and all the code and parameters behind it, be sure to go check out Sekiro Doobie's video, which I will have linked down in the description below. When it comes to Torrent, our spectral steed, one of the things we've realized since the game's release is that we actually don't know that much about him, much less so after his appearance in the DLC promo art. But for a character that we spend the majority of our time with, it's fascinating that there's still things that are being discovered about his appearance, such as this one, which I'm sure I'd seen before, but never actually made the connection in my head. So did you know that if you look closely at Torrent's eyes, you'll notice that he actually has a scar on his left eye, running about halfway down his face. And we can very clearly see that this is not present on the right eye. Now you might be thinking, well, that's interesting, but why does that matter? Well, it matters because it is yet another similarity to characters that overlap with Torrent's lore. For example, Melina, Torrent's current master when we start the game, has a closed left eye with a marking that may or may not be a scar of sorts. Ranni also has a closed and scarred left eye when we look at her spirit. And to keep with the pattern, Queen Marika's entire left side of her face is shattered at the end of the game. Now, aside from Queen Marika, Torrent, Ranni, and Melina are all considered to be bodiless spirits, able to cross over to this world in an aspect for a reason that's never fully explained. So the question is, what's with all the left eye symbolism, and how does it tie in with the lore of spirits? Which then of course leads to other questions. But for the sake of this video, that was just a cool detail I never really considered, but could potentially lead to a fascinating lore rabbit hole, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think. If I were to ask you what the most useless item in Elden Ring is, what would be your answer? You may think of something like the Roa raisins that are supposed to heal Torrent, which are somewhat nullified since Torrent heals from your flask anyway, but there is still a use there if you happen to be out of flasks. You may think of the Rainbow Stone, but aside from looking pretty, these can be used to gauge whether or not a fall will kill you. But truly the most useless item in Elden Ring is the Grace Mimic, with a description that reads, similar to Grace, this fetish draws rays guiding the way, only without any sense of order, useful as a last resort for those who have lost their way, or for use by those who believe that unrefined guidance will lead to truer encounters. And when you use this item, it does exactly what it says it does. It mimics the appearance of a grace and sends a guidance in a random direction. Now the problem here is, if you look closely enough, it's not even exactly the same as a normal grace. Regular graces have a little mound of land beneath them, while the mimic does not. And to add to it, These grace mimics only last a short duration, and you can see from having multiple here they're all pointing in different directions, making it entirely random. Now you may be thinking, well, wouldn't this be a good idea to try in PvP, potentially leaving a fake grace to trick the host? And the answer is no, it would not. Since you can't rest at a grace in a multiplayer session anyway, the absolute best case scenario is that they take maybe the 1 second count to press a button and potentially activate it, only to realize that they can't. And you may think, okay, well, if nothing else, I can at least use the grace mimic as a light source. And to that I say, I guess you can, but remember, it only lasts for a short duration, and it's nowhere close to as good a light source as a glowstone. Truly, there is no practical reason to ever use a grace mimic, making this more than likely the most useless item in the entire game. So if you can think of a good reason to use a grace mimic, let me know down below. Pretty much any lore having to do with Miquella and the Halig Tree is deeply fascinating, and it's one of the primary places in Elden Ring veiled in obscurity. But one thing that always stuck out was the way the Miquellan soldiers blow themselves up. It seems very out of character for such an orderly faction as simply a way to shine a light that Miquella may potentially see, but it's part of what makes them stand out so much, which is weird when you consider that the other type of enemy to do this exact same thing in the exact same way are the blood servants in Mohgwyn Palace, the festering skeletons that patrol its roads. They too have an almost identical animation of flinging themselves onto the player and exploding. The resemblance here is practically uncanny. Now we could simply brush this off as a reused animation, but as you all know, when it comes to lore hunting, everything has a meaning. But it does actually get interesting when you consider the common denominator, Miquella. As we know, the Halig Tree soldiers have devoted their lives to awaiting Miquella's return, and Mohgwyn Palace is where Miquella currently is in some form. So it's not outside the realm of possibility to think that some of these worshippers in the Mohgwyn Palace may have once been Miquella's soldiers. It's interesting food for thought, and yet another thing on this list I'd seen before, but never really put the pieces together. Now to finish off the video today, did you know you could do this? So yeah, apparently the Mimic tier can just die instantly to a singular lightning pot. Now I looked into this a bit trying to figure out exactly why this happens, and the reasoning apparently is that before the Mimic tier actually aggroes on the player and triggers the boss fight, the blob itself that's on the ground has a big weakness to lightning damage, and an HP pool of 350. So if you can manage to hit it with a singular projectile and deal over 350 damage, it will die before it can aggro and turn into the Mimic tier boss. So if you're ever feeling lazy and don't feel like fighting the Mimic tier, well, I hope you've got a good throwing arm. I'll definitely be trying this on my next run. Anyways though guys, that is going to do it for the video today. I hope I showed you something that you didn't already know, and if I did, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're new around here. I'm happy that we were able to get one more of these out before the DLC drops, and it won't be long now. But of course, I hope you can look forward to all the DLC content that's going to be coming out after the 21st, and until then I'll have a few more spoiler-free videos for all of us to enjoy. But with all that, I will catch you in the next one.